happy 2026 if you're listening as this episode is released. It is our first episode of the new year. I'm Teri Hart, the host of The Heart of It All, where we talk with experts about the realities of caregiving. If you are listening to this in January, it is Alzheimer's Awareness Month, so we'll be covering topics related to the most common form of dementia, Alzheimer's, for the whole month here on The Heart of It All. Let's get into it. Hi there, and welcome to this edition of The Heart of It All. I am so happy that you're here. There are some sobering statistics around Alzheimer's disease. It is the most common type of dementia. By 2030, up to 1 million Canadians could be living with the disease, which accounts for 60 to 80% of all dementia cases. And for those over the age of 65 diagnosed with Alzheimer's, 2/3 are women. Alzheimer's disease is a chronic neurodegenerative disease that destroys brain cells, causing thinking ability and memory to decline over time. Alzheimer's disease is not a normal part of aging, and it is irreversible. That's the textbook definition. But for anyone who has lived with the diagnosis for a loved one, the impact goes well beyond what any textbook could define. Alzheimer's can cause personality changes. A person's ability to understand, think, remember, and communicate will be affected. This could impact a person's ability to make decisions, perform simple tasks, or follow a conversation. To help us understand the complexities of this disease, the options people and their families have, and so very much more, I am happy to welcome Cathy Barrick. Cathy is the CEO of the Alzheimer Society of Ontario and has worked in the health and community care sectors for many years. Cathy believes that the answers to society's most challenging issues come from creativity, innovation, and collaboration. Through her work with the Alzheimer Society, Cathy leads the team to focus on the systemic issues that both hinder and help those facing dementia. Outside of her work, Cathy is a wife, mom, and grandma, the roles that truly fill her up with happiness. Founded in 1983, the Alzheimer Society of Ontario is the province's leading care and research charity committed to helping people with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Cathy, welcome so much to The Heart of It All, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Teri. Great to be here.
So let's start with the Alzheimer Society of Ontario and what the mandate is, what you are trying to accomplish with this organization.
Yeah, so the Alzheimer Society, as you mentioned, has been around for a very long time. It started out as a grassroots organization, and it was actually started by care partners. So people who were caring for people with living with dementia, they kind of got together in various groups across the province and said, we need some help. And we need to connect with each other and talk about what's going on. And over time, since in all those years since, it's grown into a networked organization across not just Ontario, but Canada as well. So we have local societies all across Ontario. There's 26 of them. And here at the Alzheimer Society of Ontario, we're kind of the coordination hub. So we work with all our local societies. We support them in various ways. But the local societies are really where the heart of the action happens. So the local societies are providing concrete help and support for people living with dementia and their care partners right across the province. And that support comes in many ways, education, counseling, support groups, social recreation, day programs, all things that people living with dementia need.
And their caregivers need. When you talk about day programs, when you talk about that is some respite for the caregivers.
Absolutely. Caregivers need respite. I think, they need a lot of things, but number one thing we hear is respite. Caregivers, they're the unsung heroes, honestly, of dementia care. There are millions of caregivers, millions and billions of unpaid caregiving hours that happen every year in this province, and the healthcare system would collapse without them, seriously. And so when we talk to caregivers, they say, listen, we understand we're in a caregiving role. It's okay, but we need a break. We need rest. And so when caregivers know that they have respite that they can count on, they can handle an awful lot. Now, they shouldn't have to handle an awful lot, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about, but they can handle an awful lot if they know they have a break. It's a 24/7 job. And so, day programs and other programs that give them a break. And a break, honestly, for care partners is often, they're doing things that need to be done. It's not really a rest, but you have to get it done. You got to get your groceries, you got to walk the dog, you have to pay the bills, all the things. And so respite is a key to helping people live successfully with dementia.
Absolutely. And, for some people, they're also taking care of children at the same time. They're also taking care of job responsibilities. It seems seemingly never ending. I want to do a thing that might seem a little bit pedestrian, Kathy, but for people who are just maybe starting on this journey or haven't heard any of these terms before, can you define respite? Because I think people have an idea of respite being different than what this is.
Yeah. So respite could be something formal. So, for example, there are organizations, one of our Alzheimer societies actually has a respite home. So, respite can be very formal in the sense that you could send the person living with dementia to a place for a day or a few days or a week or more, even as a period of a break, really. And some care partners may do that if they need to get away. Maybe, the holidays are coming up and maybe they have a big family trip for the holidays. So there are safe places that are dementia trained and, focused on supporting people living with dementia, that you can leave your person there with confidence that they will be well cared for. But respite can also be something very informal. Respite could be you have a neighbor who pops over every Tuesday from 2 to 4 so that you can go and get groceries. So respite really is a break, and it comes in, sort of very informal, to like a couple hour break, to, overnight stay in a respite place. Even long-term care homes actually offer respite as well. And probably one of maybe the most well-known respites is day program. So a place that people who are living with dementia can go for the day, and then giving that care partner the full day to do other things. And as you mentioned, many care partners are working. So having someplace safe for the person with dementia to be, and not just safe, but stimulating. It's not a daycare in the sense that, you're just putting them there and they're, sitting watching TV. It's stimulating, they're getting social connection to keep the brain as active as possible.
When somebody reaches out to you and your organization, or somebody who's listening to this right now, what would you say is the first thing somebody should know and understand about Alzheimer's and dementia right now in 2026 we're in?
Yeah, so well, that's a tricky question in a way. I think the number one thing I would want people to realize, I mean, getting a diagnosis of dementia is a life-altering diagnosis. It's a devastating diagnosis, so I certainly do not want to undermine the severity of that kind of diagnosis. But what I would want people to know going into it is it's not all bad. And supporting someone living with dementia or even having dementia, there's lots of life left to live after you get a diagnosis. A diagnosis is not the end of life. It may be end of life sort of as you know it, and obviously the disease progresses over time. But to really, not be completely devastated, like, life is over, because it's not. There can be many, many good years still ahead, and the key to that is getting support. And people who are listening to this, whether it be a care partner or someone living with dementia, the number one thing you should do is reach out for support. And that is what the Alzheimer Society is here to do. So you cannot do it alone. You should not have to do it alone. And so reaching out for support, making connections, getting some help can make sort of what I said about, it's not all awful, can actually be more of a reality the more help you surround yourself with.
And it's never too early. Even if somebody is diagnosed and not exhibiting significant life-changing behaviors, get the systems in place. Am I hearing you properly with that, Kathy?
Absolutely. And it's never too early. So even at the point of, if you're questioning, like, I don't know if my brain is really working the way it used to, seek out help, get tested. But also, so many of the risk factors associated with dementia are modifiable. So the earlier you get your brain checked, you know what's happening in your brain. There are still things you can do that can potentially slow the progression of the disease, that can keep you healthier longer. So, I mean, one of the things we talk about at the Alzheimer Society a lot is the need for early detection and diagnosis. It's critical. And one of the, modifiable risk factors is social isolation. The more isolated you are, the higher risk you are of developing dementia. And if you already have sort of the beginnings of dementia in your brain, Alzheimer's in your brain, staying socially connected can actually help you progress through the disease at a slower rate.
We are going to talk about all of that. I'm gonna circle back to that, Kathy, because those are the things that really I do think people also need to be aware of fundamentally that, I think that there is and we can understand it, right? A reticence to say, I think there might be something wrong with mom, dad, aunt, uncle, myself. But there is a positive to being able to find this out sooner.
Absolutely. The sooner, the better. And, in 2026, we have medication that can help. It's not yet available. It's been approved, but, so the earlier people know, the better. Again, not minimizing, what you just mentioned, Terry. It's a very scary thing to imagine that the thing that kind of makes us who we are and allows us to function in the way that we do every day, contemplating that that's not working the way it used to is a very terrifying thing to contemplate. But not doing something about it and not getting detected early doesn't make it better. It actually makes it worse.
Absolutely. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about Alzheimer's that have been, floating around that people are still clinging on to?
Honestly, probably the number one thing is that it's a normal part of aging, and it is not a normal part of aging. Memory loss is not a normal part of aging. And I'm not talking about the typical or the sort of normal memory issues that we all have. If we're not paying attention and we put our keys in a place that we don't usually put them and we can't find them, that is not aging related and it is not Alzheimer's necessarily. But, I think lots of times individuals, families, and the medical community sometimes minimize, think, well, you're just getting older. That's just normal. Your brain is slowing down a little bit. That is not true. This is a disease. It has, physiology that's happening in your brain that is not supposed to be happening. And so that would be the number one misconception I would want to try to debunk.
So it is a disease. It's not a normal part of aging. So, how is the disease diagnosed? How is it you have Alzheimer's and not just normal memory loss from aging?
There is no such thing as normal memory loss for aging. No such thing. So, again, and we're talking memory loss like in a bigger, like, again, it's not about losing your keys. Memory loss is more about like really significant things and it's a pattern and it's not just about memory loss. There's other symptoms that go along with it. So, if you're misplacing your keys, like, not to worry. Like, we all misplace our keys, but if you're misplacing your keys, you forget how to sign your name, you are out driving your car going to Costco and you can't remember how to get home, not losing your car in the parking lot because I do that regularly. Uh, but that's because I'm not paying attention, right? So there's a difference and it's a pattern of, and it's a change in the way that you are normally able to function.
How you're moving through the world.
That's right. So if I've always been kind of absent-minded and I'm like, that's just how my brain is working. But if I'm usually like really sharp and I have a super good memory, and like I said, I'm driving home from Costco and I can't remember where I should turn, that is a more significant sign that something is amiss.
So you bring up, driving, maybe not being able to remember directions, where you're going. What would some other early signs be, Kathy?
One of the early signs that actually gets missed a lot is it can be masked like depression. So, really low mood, low energy, sort of an apathy. If you're normally, you like to go out and, play pickleball and you have a book club and you have a really vibrant social life. And over time, you're starting to just not want to do that. That could be a sign. And again, it often gets misunderstood as depression, but that could be one of them. Behavior changes can also be a sign. So if you've normally been a pretty laid back person and you're, more quick to anger or For example, a client that I knew years ago, she actually had young onset dementia, and her family thought, like, what is going on? She's turned into a real, like, raging person, but that was not her personality. They thought, like, what is happening? And it turned out to be dementia. So, personality changes, loss of ability to function in normal ways. So, like, getting lost when you're going driving. Another person, sort of their first, like, aha moment, like something really is wrong, is they went to sign a check or they were buying a house or something like that. They went to sign their name and they couldn't remember how to sign their name. It's something like significant like that. And again, it's sort of over time, losing your words. Again, not the brain cramp that we all get and think, oh, I can't remember the word for such and such. But if it's happening a lot, maybe having difficulty carrying on a conversation because you're having trouble following what's happening. You may repeat yourself, things like that. So again, it's kind of a collection of things.
So, just backtracking a little bit to that crucial diagnosis of
Mhm.
this disease. Is it a chat with a doctor? Is there actual tests that people go through to receive a proper diagnosis of Alzheimer's?
There are, and the diagnostic pathway, so to speak, for Alzheimer's is actually improving every day. So back in the day, people said, well, you have dementia, it's probably Alzheimer's because Alzheimer's is the most common form. But there was actually no sort of firm diagnostic test. So there are now, and they continue to evolve. So, for example, you can get a spinal tap, a cerebral spinal fluid test, which is a spinal tap where they test your spinal fluid and they can see the proteins in the spinal fluid that are not supposed to be there. So that can be a confirmatory diagnosis. A PET scan where they actually look inside your brain, another confirmation as well. And coming along, not as available in Canada yet, but coming quickly, I would say, are blood based biomarkers. So, and there's a number of blood based biomarkers in development.
So, is that just a simple blood test?
Yes. Yes. And some can be rule out tests, some can be rule in tests, and they can test the blood. And there's different biomarkers for kind of different things, but there's many, many blood based biomarkers in development.
I can tell just by your tone of voice, Kathy, how excited you are at the possibilities for diagnosis for people. Again, I just want to be clear about why that diagnosis and getting that medical confirmation is so crucial, not only for patient, client, person, but also their loved ones.
Yeah, it's critical. So imagine if this was cancer. Imagine if you went to the doctor and they said, well, we think you've got cancer. We're not really sure what one, but carry on. Like, we would not say that. And we shouldn't say that for people with dementia either. It matters what kind of dementia they have for treatment options. So, and again, it's the world has been slow to develop treatments for people living with dementia, but they are coming. So the fact that we have some treatments going to be available really matters because,
Mm.
if you have breast cancer or lung cancer, the treatment is going to be different. So you have to know what you have. So same thing with dementia. The other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, there's modifiable risk factors. So knowing that you have something happening in your brain, that's a great opportunity to start to do some things differently to help keep your brain engaged, keep yourself healthy, etc. And social isolation, as I mentioned earlier as well, is really key. And so as your brain starts to change, one of the common things that happens is you do actually start to isolate because you're afraid you can't follow a conversation, etc. So, yes, it matters what kind of dementia you have. It also helps the care partner and the person living with dementia understand a little bit about what the future might look like.
Mhm.
They do progress in somewhat predictable ways. So, if you have frontal temporal dementia, for example, that one tends to progress a little faster. Sometimes the manifestations of FTD, frontal temporal dementia, are a little bit more challenging because it's your frontal lobe that's being affected, which is really kind of the brake system for our behavior. Our frontal lobe sort of tells us what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So some of the behaviors that can be exhibited by people with FTD can be quite challenging. Vascular dementia tends to go a little bit slower and tends to be exacerbated by cardiovascular events, so like mini strokes, etc. So whereas Alzheimer's is sort of like And again, it's variable by individual, but Alzheimer's kind of has sort of a trajectory that's kind of a slow and steady decline in ability. So again, knowing what kind of dementia you have can help you prepare for what your future might look like.
I'll tell you a boots on the ground story, personal. My dad had vascular dementia and he'd had a few strokes. He got lost walking the dog. Jakey got him home. We lost him August 1st of 2024, but we thought, and my mom, retired nurse, we thought he was on some kind of fast track for Alzheimer's or frontal temporal dementia. And when we found out he had vascular dementia, it changed everything for us. So that is a very like boots on the ground, tangible
Mhm.
story of every decision we made about him and his care after that diagnosis.
Absolutely. So having all the facts available to you obviously helps you make a better plan.
It's a tenet of the heart of it all of this podcast that knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And, I've said, Kathy, if I were to rename this podcast, I wasn't not going to have my name in the title though. But if I was going to rename this podcast, it would be None of This is a Surprise. Because we have to recognize that this is happening and we have to talk about it. So you mentioned I'm gonna come back to the things because I know people are like, listening and being like, Teri, follow up on the things we can do. And I promise you, listenership, I am going to follow up on that. However, I want to jump back to what you mentioned earlier about the stages of Alzheimer's. And a lot is being said about the stages and how it progresses. So let's talk about what caregivers, what family members, what people can expect upon diagnosis. What are the stages of Alzheimer's?
Yeah, and there's depending on who sort of which website you look at, they can tell you there's 7 stages, there's 5. I would say there's kind of 3. There's the early stages, and in the early stages, this is when most often, either the person who's experiencing the changes or the people around them, so care partners, are thinking like something's not right. Not sure what, but the person can still function. So definitely things are happening and, not maybe functioning at the way they used to, but can still function and still look after themselves. The middle stages when the symptoms kind of become a little bit more moderate. So that is when you would definitely probably know that something is not right. Again, in the early stages as well, and this happens so often. And actually, our call volume will skyrocket in the new year because when people get together over the holidays, they haven't seen each other in a while. And then you see mom or dad, you're like, oh, something's wrong. So that could be early stage where you're like, "Oh, something's really changed."
We dropped a special episode in December talking about people seeing seniors in their lives for the first time in maybe a while and some of the things that they should look for. What in your mind are those things that you should look for?
A change. So something that is different than the way they have been before. So again, like the symptoms I'm talking about. So it could be mood related, it could be memory related. Are they having trouble sort of following the conversation? Are they repeating themselves more than usual? Did mom always make her classic stuffing and now she can't remember how she did that? Things like that that are different than the way they used to be. But also in the early stages, they can cover. Listen, we all can cover, right? We maybe didn't get a very good night's sleep or we've had a fight with our spouse and you're not really feeling it. We can cover that up in our day-to-day life. You can kind of carry on. Well, people with dementia can do that too.
And spouses can tend to cover for each other.
Absolutely. And actually, that happens a lot. I mean, I'm kind of all over the place here, but that happens a lot when a spouse dies and they've been covering for the other one. And so then you go to, mom or dad, whoever's left, the kids go and think, oh my gosh, they're really quite far progressed. And we had no idea.
So we've the three stages. The first being something's just off.
Yeah. The middle stage is when there's no question that something's off. You're like, yeah, there's really something wrong. And so it's during this sort of middle to moderate stage where people probably the symptoms that people most associate with Alzheimer's would be more evident. So like forgetting who you are, really, like you said, your dad got lost walking the dog. Those kinds of things like and maybe having more difficulty caring for themselves. So their usual nighttime routine of, brushing their teeth and washing their face and things like that, getting mixed up around that. They may not even want to shower. That's actually a really common thing for people with dementia, like a real struggle with hygiene, getting in the shower. Often sort of a very high source of stress for care partners trying to get their person into the shower. And some of their behaviors may change as well. My grandpa had, well, I had 3 grandparents who had dementia, but my grandpa, who I just absolutely adored, he was so kind to me, and he was living with me for a little while when he had Alzheimer's, and, he became like a real jerk at times to me, which is very unusual behavior for him. Like, he would never, call me names, or one time he threatened to knock me over the head with the telephone. Those are the days when you had, like, a phone on the wall. He was gonna hit me over the head with the receiver. So, very unusual behavior for grandpa. So, moderate stage, you're gonna see those kinds of things, and even sometimes they can be quite paranoid.
Are there benchmarks for how long these stages last, Kathy?
It really varies. Honestly, it varies by a lot. I mean, you can live in the early stages for actually quite some time, like years. I would say sort of as the disease progresses, it may feel like the stages kind of get shorter because the damage that's happening in the brain is really damaging some significant parts of the brain. So they kind of seem shorter. Although when you get to sort of the end stage where people are like they really just cannot function anymore. So this is, if you think about the last time you were in or saw somebody in a nursing home, that's kind of like the late stage where they really can't function at any independent way at all. They may have lost their ability to speak. Even towards the very end, swallowing becomes a challenge, not being able to swallow. I mean, lots of people with dementia, sort of one of the secondary ways people can die is actually pneumonia because they actually aspirate when they're swallowing. So those are the sort of 3 stages, sort of early, still can function, but something's not right. Middle stage, something's really not right, and they may actually be having some manifestations of the disease that are interfering in their ability to live. And then the later stage definitely cannot function on their own and need quite a bit of care.
Based on that, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. I think that most caregivers dealing with a loved one who has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia have an experience where they get to a point where they say, "This is way more than I thought it was going to be." Believing what you just said, that that would be in that middle part. What can that look like for people, Kathy?
Absolute exhaustion, honestly, because in that middle stage, that's where, well, even think about, when you have a little child, a toddler who asks you the same thing repeatedly. It gets really annoying. And it's that constant, it feels a little bit like being badgered, right? Like, when are we going out? When are we going out? When are we going out? When is someone coming? When is someone coming? And it's fueled by this anxiety that the person with dementia is experiencing. They're confused about things, so they're just trying to communicate. But if you're on the receiving end of that and you're trying to make dinner, or you've managed to sit down for a minute and you're trying to read a book, or you're playing Wordle for the day, like whatever, and someone's like just constantly at you, that can be just so annoying and exhausting. And it's a kind of 24/7 thing as well. So in the middle stages as well, you can tend to see some real sleep disruptions, some sundowning types of behaviors, which is when people, when the sun starts to go down, the level of confusion and angst that a person with dementia can feel can be quite high, so their sleep can be disrupted. It's a constant 24/7 job. Early stage, yes, you're kind of keeping an eye and making sure everything's okay and all of that stuff, which can be exhausting also. But in the middle stages, it's really that kind of stage where you really feel like really responsible for the other person's safety and well-being because they are really struggling.
What is the most pressing thing that you are seeing from folks? Is it getting medical care for the diagnosis? Is it resources? Is it the big question of what do I do after diagnosis? What is the most pressing thing that you're seeing with this disease and its prevalence in our country right now and its growth in our country right now?
That's a hard to pick one pressing thing. I would actually have to say two. One is getting a diagnosis is a real problem, for all kinds of reasons that we've talked about, people's own personal fear of getting that diagnosis, the stigma attached to it. I don't want that to be true. I don't want people to know that. As well as, as I mentioned, we're on the cusp of some treatments, some better diagnostic tools available to us that has not been available up until now. So the medical community has sadly felt like, well, like what's the point of doing a diagnosis? There's nothing that can be done anyway, which is incidentally not true, but that is even when there's no medications, there's still things that can be done. But, it's been hard to break that belief that, well, nothing can be done. So what's the point of diagnosing it? So that is a real problem. And the second is the lack of resources. So, I mean, we know our healthcare system is absolutely stretched to the max. Investment in community supports is critical for people living with dementia. Absolutely critical, because if you do not have supports in the community that can support the person with dementia, which by the byproduct is you're supporting care partners. If you cannot keep those care partners healthy and able to support people living with dementia, we're going to have an even bigger problem than we have right now, which is already pretty big.
Yeah, it is happening now. The future is now.
Yes, correct.
I sense in you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I sense in you a frustration with the medical community and how they have treated this disease up until this point. Is that a fair suggestion, Kathy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and no like harshness in the sense of like nobody's doing it on purpose. Family doctors they're not trying to cause harm, obviously, but they've been at a bit of a loss. Like, well, what do we do with these folks who are being diagnosed with dementia? That would be like saying to someone with cancer, well, you have cancer, but there's nothing I can do about it. Like, imagine being a doctor having to say that. And, doctors had to say that for many years until cancer advancements, came along. So, from a family doc's perspective, it's pretty awful to have to give someone a really terrible diagnosis with not a lot of options available. There's no treatment plan. There hasn't been anyway. That's coming. So it's not with the doctors themselves that my frustration is. It's sort of how the system around it is built. Think about doctors as well in terms of like when you book an appointment with your family doctor, what do you get, 5 or 10 minutes? Which is usually fine, but you cannot assess somebody for dementia in 5 or 10 minutes, especially if they come in and doc says, "Hey, how are you, Kathy?" And I say, "I'm great. How are you?" And I can cover, and then, they go, and the care partner is like, "What? It took me so long to get them here, and now everything's hunky dory, and the doctor didn't say anything." And right, so it's kind of a confluence of all these issues that kind of culminate in not great diagnostics happening in the medical community. And again, not because doctors are intending to cause harm. It's just sort of a system that's set up that way. Um, yeah, all the things.
I'm also going to say we're in an interesting period right now, or I feel like we're in an interesting period right now, and I could be wrong on this. I am not a medical doctor, but um, here we are in 2026. We're 6 years post pandemic. And I feel there were a lot of people who right now are living with Alzheimer's, living with dementia, who fell through the COVID cracks when everything was online and we weren't seeing doctors and family in person. Is that a fair suggestion on my part, Kathy?
Definitely. And also, I would say, again, anecdotally, I have not studied this, but people who had dementia during the pandemic actually tended to progress quicker because of that isolation. As a matter of fact, a couple of clients that I had been, pretty close to over the years, knew them for quite some time, like a number of them passed away during the pandemic. And prior to the pandemic, physically, they were quite healthy, but that social isolation, the inability to come out to participate in Alzheimer Society programs really took a toll, and obviously also took a toll on the care partners as well.
Yeah. I mean, the options were just squeezed down to virtually nothing. All right. I promised we're going to get to it and we're going to get to it. So let's talk about where we're at now in terms of what can be done. Where are we at on the cusp of changing lives post diagnosis, pre diagnosis in terms of Alzheimer's and dementia? treatment and the future?
Yeah, so it is an exciting time, I would say. There are many, many drugs in development, so that is excellent news, and those are treatments. But there's also a lot of work happening, which I actually find really interesting and fascinating, in the preclinical phase of Alzheimer's. So the working theory is that I could have Alzheimer's in my brain right now whilst talking to you, making sense, I hope, but the disease process is happening. You don't see the symptoms of the disease until it's affected the brain enough that it shows up in behaviors, right? So it shows up in my, inability to continue functioning, things like that. But there is a lot of work being done on how can we actually find it out sooner. So, for example, there's one device that's been developed that's an eye scanner. So, one of the first places you can actually like see amyloid, which is one of the proteins implicated in dementia, in Alzheimer's, you can see in the back of your eye. So, there's sort of two things you will hear talked about when you hear about Alzheimer's. One is amyloid, and one is tau. And there's still some question about how they kind of interact with each other, but both are present in Alzheimer's disease and they should not be present in the way that they show up. So amyloid is one of them, and that can be developing in your brain for like 20 years before you see any symptoms. So imagine you're 40 years old, 30 years old, you go in to get your eyes tested. There is a machine that can detect the amyloid in the back of your eye. Now, this is very important for a number of reasons. One is the one drug that's been approved in Canada thus far works on clearing amyloid from your brain, but it has to be given in the very early stages. So the earlier, the better. So imagine if you were to find out very early on that you have amyloid happening in your brain, that could open up some treatment opportunities for you far earlier than when you show up at the doctor and you got lost coming home from Costco. So that's one thing. The other is, and I know we'll get to it eventually as well, but the modifiable risk factors. So if you are 40 years old and you go for your eye test and they say, hey, you've got some amyloid in your eyes, that's not good. You can, go full force on some of those modifiable risk factors. So you can change the trajectory of how the disease progresses. Also, there's some drug companies that are working on a vaccine. Researchers haven't quite figured out sort of what triggers it, what happens in the brain that makes all these things start to happen. But they're trying to figure that out, obviously. But they're also like, there's at least one drug company that I know of that is working on a vaccine. So a potential prevention of dementia. So again, all these things are happening. There's the blood-based biomarkers, there's even the cognitive tests. So, when you go to the doctor and you say, listen, I'm worried about my brain, you're going to do some tests. You're going to do the MOCA and other things, MMSE, things like that. Even those tests are being updated all the time. I mean, one of the sad facts about those kinds of tests, when they were developed, they're developed for a certain community. They're not very diverse. So how Alzheimer's is understood and in the Indigenous community is very different. So it's very important that those tests are sensitive to the cultural experiences of different communities. In the Indigenous community, dementia is not seen as a horrible thing. The Indigenous community actually has a really beautiful interpretation of dementia. It's actually the people are kind of regressing back to sort of their childhood ways as they transition out of this world. It's actually quite beautiful. It's not seen as stigmatizing as perhaps in other communities. Again, not to say that it's like all rainbows and puppies in the Indigenous community if you have dementia, but their interpretation of it and how they approach it, even their approach in terms of, taking care of each other in a family unit is very different.
In the intro, I said that for those over the age of 65 diagnosed with Alzheimer's, 2/3 are women. Gender plays a part in this disease. Why?
Good question. We still don't know. And you know why we don't know is because many of the studies over the years have been done on men. And men and women are not the same. I was just actually at an event on women's brain health, which was really interesting. So, women go through some very significant changes in our body over the years when you think about when you reach maturity and you start menstruating, childbirth, perimenopause, menopause, etc. And there have not been very many studies that have looked at how these fast hormonal changes affect women's brains. And so there is a difference, and we need to understand that more,
We actually have different insides. Like, how did they not figure that out?
right? Exactly. And so doing studies on women's brains is critically important. And actually, at this event that I was telling you about, one of the topics was about, because there was a period of time where it was thought that hormone replacement therapy was actually protective for cognitive abilities. That seems to not be true. Also, newsflash too, the recent study lately said, drinking even in moderate amounts is not protective either. So there goes our, 2 glasses of red wine a day. Not protective.
That's the most upsetting one.
I know.
Okay, so let's get to those modifiable risk factors. Modifiable risk behaviors?
Yeah, or risk factors. Yeah.
Okay, let's give the people the goods because everybody wants to know, Cathy, what are the modifiable risk factors or behaviors that people can incorporate, whether they are concerned about their brains or whether they have been diagnosed with any form of dementia, Alzheimer's being the most prevalent?
So probably the number one is smoking. Newsflash, smoking is not good for you. So stop. And if you stop, obviously, let's say you've been smoking for 30 years. If you stop, I mean, you can't undo all the damage. Some of it you can rebound from. So if you're a smoker, try to stop, number one. But we've known that for years. The other thing that's probably the most impactful in potentially slowing down either the progression or even slowing down the onset of symptoms is exercise. And you don't have to be going and running a marathon. We're talking like 3 times a week. Cardio, like your heart rate has to be elevated. So you got to be like walking at a good pace, but you don't have to be like a crazy athlete. You got to just be active. So the more you can physically move your body, you could like walk around the block at a good clip. That can, and again, don't quote me on this, but like that can delay the onset by like 3 to 4 years. That's pretty good. And so exercise is super duper important. Education, keeping your brain active. Now, do not equate this with if you do Sudoku or Wordle every day, your brain is going to be protected.
So Sudoku and Wordle, come on, connections has to count. That breaks my brain every day.
I know. I actually had to stop playing Wordle because I was getting so frustrated. So maybe doomed. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to prevent Alzheimer's, but the point is you want to keep your brain active. You want to continue to develop these new neural pathways. Listen, I think one of the greatest ways to do that as well is I think you can audit courses at university for free when you're a senior. So you don't like do the exams and the essays and stuff like that, but you can go sit in on a class and learn something new, like even things like masterclass. You can get that on your TV, you can learn new things, read books that are of interest to you. So staying active, social isolation, also huge. Do not isolate. So, and again, that doesn't mean it's not the same for everybody. You're not going out and, if you're not usually a super social person, you're not going out and joining these social clubs, but you want to be social in the way that feels good for you. So let's say you're a real nature lover, joining a group that goes on a nature walk every Tuesday and Thursday morning, or, watching like whatever it is for you, that's going to be different. And another, which actually doesn't get a lot of awareness, is your hearing.
Cathy Barrick, if you didn't listen to it, go back and listen to our episode. It was just at the end of December with Beverly Wolf, an audiologist who talks explicitly about the need for diagnosis of hearing loss and how it is a huge contributing factor to dementia.
Absolutely. So again, these are all things that are completely within our ability. And also, you don't have to be perfect at any of these things. Like, just do better. I mean, we all know the heart and stroke people have done a really good job at helping us understand what's good for our heart. What's good for our heart is good for our brain. And so, even though we all know that, do we do all the things we're supposed to do all the time? No, but just do better, right? The Mediterranean diet, also super good for your brain. Lots of berries, leafy greens, fish. You don't have to eat like that every single day of the week, but if you start to incorporate some more of those kinds of things, it has a protective factor for your brain. So small steps, make a big difference.
Is Alzheimer's hereditary?
It can be, but it's very rare for it to be hereditary. So a lot of people worry about that for obvious reasons. I had 3 grandparents with dementia, but the familial kind, the kind that's genetic that is passed down is extremely rare. And if that was in your family, you would probably know it because it would be like everywhere. And also the hereditary kind tends to be younger onset.
Mm.
Not always, but tends to be. So again, don't panic. There are also risk genes that we
Mhm.
have. So you can actually get tested as well for the risk gene. If you have the risk gene, Chris Hemsworth tested and he has the risk genes, but that does not mean he's going to get it. It means his risk profile is higher than the general population, but it's not a guarantee. But there are some that if you have that particular one, the genetic precursor to it, you are going to get it, but very rare, very rare.
How is technology helping? What are the big leaps that we're seeing with technology specifically regarding caregiving and Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yeah, I think there's been actually some really cool developments in that area, particularly for, as you mentioned, care partners. So, if you're child of someone who has Alzheimer's and there's, let's say, 3 siblings and you're all trying to do your part, but you also may be very spread out. People are all over the place. So there's like a lot of technology, apps and things like that that help you coordinate care between people. So that's kind of cool, as well as being able to stay connected to people with dementia. Now, technology is not a replacement for real people in real time. So I want to say that. But if you live in London, England, and your parent lives in Toronto, like a FaceTime call is most definitely better than nothing. So those kinds of things, as well as some of the other technologies, GPS technology has really progressed. So, wearable GPS devices that can, I don't like to say track because this is not like a police state and we're not watching people, but, like the example you gave, Terry, of your dad who got lost out walking the dog, him wearing a wearable device that you would be able to know where he was, he still had enough independence that he could do that. You don't want to take that away because it's really good for him to be out walking the dog, but knowing that if he is not home in a half an hour, I can look up on my phone where he is and I can go there and get him.
Full transparency, I put a tile in the pocket of his coat faster than you can say,
Exactly.
"Dad, I love you." I mean, there was no way that I wasn't doing that. I know that's not what those devices are recommended for, but
I think they're good because the ultimate end game here is you wanna help the person maintain their independence. Imagine how devastating it would have been to your dad to say, "Listen, you went walking the dog and you didn't make it home, and so you can't go do that anymore." That's not helpful.
and frankly, Kathy, in our situation with dad, my mom, primary caregiver 100%. I talk about my parents a lot. I never want anybody to mistake the fact that my mom was primary caregiver and I was very, very secondary. With him, there was no need for him to know that we did have that in his coat.
Yeah,
It was like,
exactly.
you just he it was like none of his business in a way. You go about what you're doing. We wanted to keep everything as tickety-boo for him as possible, and it was our responsibility to keep track of what he needed and what because we wanted him to live the fullest life possible for as long as we had him for.
Exactly, exactly. So, some of these technologies can actually allow that freedom to continue, which is really positive.
What are the biggest gaps that you see in community support, and what would you like to see, us looking towards as this disease is growing so rapidly? What do we need?
We need more. A lot of the community supports we have in place are really great, and not just from the Alzheimer Society. There's many organizations that offer support to care partners and people living with dementia, seniors, all the things. So there's lots of good things happening. We need more. I guess if I had one like real wish, it would be more home care.
Mm.
So that's the stuff that provides respite for care partners. It takes some of the load off in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes showering can be a real challenge. Let's take some of that burden off of the care partner and provide that in a community setting. So we just need more and more and more. And I mean, there's only so much to go around. And I know home and community care or Ontario Health at Home, I think is what it's called now. They're doing the best that they can, but it's just not adequate. It is not enough to support people adequately living at home. And I guess maybe if I had one other wish too, it's actually dementia-specific training. PSW is probably primarily because they are the backbone of dementia care in sort of community long-term care, et cetera. They need help to understand sort of the disease process, what are the best ways to interact. I mean, at the Alzheimer Society, we have a program called You First, which is for PSWs to help them understand the disease.
You first?
Yeah, so You First, and it's actually a structured program. Mostly it's PSWs who take it that learn about the disease. When you go to school to be a PSW, you get like maybe a couple hours on the brain, period. PSWs don't necessarily understand sort of how the behaviors might manifest, and they don't understand as well that what they are doing may actually be instigating the behaviors. Unintentionally, of course, but you got to know how to interact.
So same thing for caregivers, same thing for loved ones who
Yeah.
are just starting this journey. What are your recommendations for, you brought up the repetition earlier that I think anybody listening to this who's on this journey is just like, if they're listening in their car, they're grabbing their steering wheel because they can relate so significantly to that repetition. Also, I think, those personality changes, some aggression that maybe is atypical to their loved one. Cathy, what are your recommendations for people who are starting this journey in terms of, I'm just gonna ask one specific thing because we're gonna do 4 weeks on Alzheimer's, but on communication, on when you are talking to a loved one who has had this diagnosis, they're repeating themselves, they're showing aggressive behavior, there's a fight that's gonna happen. What are your recommendations?
Yeah, I think my number one recommendation would be to try to be where the person is at. So if someone's asking you the same question all the time, instead of saying, I told you already, we're leaving at 2 o'clock. First of all, try to be creative. Say, you sound really excited about us going to see Teri at 2 o'clock. What are you looking forward to? And see if you can divert the conversation into something else to get because they're fixated on it. So try to have the conversation. And again, that's not going to happen perfectly all the time because we're all human and we get irritated and say, I already told you we're going at 2 o'clock. But if you can try to sort of be where they're at, try to pick up why are they asking you that all the time? You can also implement some other things to say, I've set an alarm on Alexa. I've asked Alexa to let us know 10 minutes before we're going. So when you hear Alexa go, that means we're going to be going in 10 minutes. Now, it may work, it may not. And you have to trial and error, right? You're going to figure out what works for your person and what doesn't. But just try to stay in the moment. And if they're saying something that's really like out there and it's just not true, you don't have to tell them that it's not true. My grandma, for example, my cousin came in the room one time and my grandma was freaking out because there was a cat in her bed. There was no cat on the bed. But my grandma was freaking out because there was a cat on the bed. So my cousin just said to her, well, grandma, where is it? And she's like, well, it's right there. So my cousin went to get it. And she's like, now it's over there. So my cousin was like running around the room trying to catch this imaginary cat, but it settled my grandma down. So just try to be creative.
And meet them where they're at. Whatever is happening is their truth.
That is 100% true. They think it is real. So it actually makes it worse if you try to convince them that it's not real. So if grandma thinks there's a cat there, then okay, grandma, what kind of cat is it?
Very cute cat, I'm sure. We were recently in a situation, again, another boots on the ground story of coming home from a family funeral with a family member who has Alzheimer's and frontotemporal dementia, and she thought the funeral was for somebody else. And instead of correcting her, we were able to just have the conversation about that other person because it had no bearing. And I think that she wanted to talk about that other person. Now, I don't know if that's true, but we were able to have a really great conversation about the other person. It kept her going and not caught in that loop. So that was something we were able to do. I've also heard, Cathy, and I know you're not a medical doctor, but your level of experience, I think, takes you frankly beyond medical training. And I think that's important to recognize in these conversations. And thank you so much for all of this. People are just going to be blown away by this episode, I have no doubt. But I've heard that you can ask the same question to somebody 3 times. And if they don't answer it, if they're not giving you the information, then move on. Is that because I do think that people who are caregivers need some framework, need some rules. So is the 3 rule a fair rule, do you think?
I wouldn't even maybe give it 3. I would even say like once. If they're not picking up what you're putting down, try it a different way or come back to it later. Or, and also it's also the way you ask the question. So if I
Mm.
say, Teri, what do you want for dinner? That is like, that takes a lot of brain power to contemplate its dinner. What would normal dinner food be? What do we have in the fridge? Blah, blah, blah. Right? As opposed to, hey, Teri, it's going to be dinner soon. I was thinking of either making pork chops or pasta. Is there one of those that you would prefer? Right? It narrows it, maybe makes it a little more accessible for them to answer.
I'm always hesitant to make this correlation because I think that there is a danger in it, but I'm going to ask you about it and you can correct me or say there's no danger because maybe I'm wrong or maybe I'm getting onto something here of treating people with Alzheimer's or dementia as a child, like the infantilization of it and still giving them their autonomy. Like there's a fine line that one is walking there, Cathy.
Yeah.
Can you delineate that? Is there a danger there?
I think there's a danger if you infantilize them. Like, listen, if I was older and someone's like started talking to me like a baby and like, do you want pasta or a pork chop? That would offend me. So don't do that. Like, don't infantilize them like that. But when you're thinking about communication strategies, yes. So the strategies, like you don't tell a 3-year-old a 5-step task. You tell a 3-year-old one task at a time. I need you to go get your pajamas on. When they do that, now I need you to go and brush your teeth. Right. So again, it's the strategies. You definitely want to mirror how you would communicate with someone who is younger.
That is an excellent delineation, and I'm very, very pleased to hear that delineation. Thank you very much. For someone who is listening to this, who is feeling overwhelmed, either newly diagnosed or in that middle to late stages, wherever they're at, when that overwhelm sets in, where should they turn? Where is a step? Where is a valve to open?
Call the Alzheimer Society. Plain and simple. Call your local Alzheimer Society. And if you don't know which one it is, just call the first phone number you find and they will direct you to the one that's closest to you. One of our programs that we have, it's called First Link. And the whole purpose of that is we want us to be the first link for people living with dementia and care partners. If you are, and even if you're worried, even if you haven't gotten a diagnosis and you just don't know what to do, and I'm concerned, call us. We can help point in the right direction of resources. We can support you through, and that's one of the things about the Alzheimer's side as well, is we support people from like before diagnosis right through to after the person has passed away. So we support, care partners into their grieving process. So the Alzheimer's Society is here to help you navigate the journey wherever you are on it. We have oodles. I couldn't even talk about all of them. Oodles and oodles of supports available that will suit your needs. So if you're a group joiner and you want to join a group, we got that for you. If that's not really your style, we got some resources. You can talk to social workers individually, all the things. So honestly, please reach out. That is what I would say. Don't do it alone. Feeling overwhelmed is normal. So don't even feel bad about that either, because lots of times you hear care partners feeling guilty that they feel so exhausted. And, even care partners, it's normal to feel resentful. I didn't want to do this. I don't want to be a care partner. That's okay. So reaching out to the Alzheimer's Society so you can, talk to us, you can talk to other care partners, knowing that you're not alone actually makes it so much better as well. And it can normalize the experience. So you don't have to, lay awake at night and think I feel so bad because I lost my temper today. It's normal. It's normal.
I end every episode of this with asking one. Sometimes the simplest questions are the hardest to answer, but I do end every episode with this question. How can we support caregivers better?
So you got to show up for caregivers. So Emma Willis talked about, if you're talking to somebody who's a care partner, so instead of saying, if you need anything, just let me know. That puts the burden on the care partner. They then have to reach out to you to say, hey, I'm going to Costco on the weekend. What can I pick you up while I'm there? And I'll just drop it off for you. No tea required, nothing. I'll leave it on the porch if that's what you want. But I'm going. So what can I pick up for you? Things like that. Be as concrete as possible in the ways that you can support, but also, even if you can't do things like that, be there for them. Honestly, we hear this so often that people disappear when dementia diagnosis comes into the picture. Longtime friends just disappear, and it's because, well, lots of reasons, but mostly I think it's because they're afraid. They don't know what to do. They're nervous about, what if I say the wrong thing, or, whatever. Don't disappear on these people. They need you more than ever. So show up for them. Show up.
Yeah. I think there's a fear that it's gonna be them. It's such a complicated and awful situation. I'll tell you, and this is not to be, but one of the things I did with a family member who has dementia, and you know what? I've got dentist. So I put a family member on the same dental schedule as I have, and I take her to the dentist. And that's what we do.
Perfect. That's perfect. That's an amazing way to be very concrete in your support. Plus, it's a draggy kind of job, right? So you're taking off a burden and you're providing respite.
I think I could do just the entire month with just you, because your knowledge, your forthrightness, your empathy, and your specific forward motion on this very, very important topic is all to be so very much admired. I'm so internally grateful. I'm thrilled that we're starting off this month with you and giving people the resource of the Alzheimer Society, wherever it is in their community. Reach out. And even if you're not at the point of picking up the phone and calling, check out the website. The website is fantastic. Cathy, what we're going to put it in the show notes, but for anybody who's not jumping to the show notes, what is the website address for the Alzheimer's Society?
Alzheimer.ca. Very easy to remember. Tons of resources on there. You can find your local society. Yeah, Alzheimer.ca.
Is the Alzheimer's Society a charity?
It is a charity. Yes, it is. So give, give, give.
Thank you all so much for what you're doing. Appreciate you intensely. I have no doubt we'll be reaching out again to talk more about this, because truly your knowledge and what you're doing is so important. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for bringing awareness to this very important issue. And honestly, people with dementia are my absolute favorite. I adore them. And so, the more awareness we can bring to this topic, and maybe people won't be so afraid, would be great.
Awesome. Thanks, Cathy. January is Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and we are continuing with this content throughout the month. We have incredible guests lined up. Wherever you are in learning about this disease, in living with somebody who has the disease, or knowing someone who is affected by the disease themselves or in a caregiving role, I think we heard from Cathy that what people need is support. And I hope you can find it within yourself to give those who need it that support. And if you yourself need support, please reach out to the Alzheimer Society wherever you are in Canada. And as I said, week in and week out, please reach out to us wherever you find us. We're on all the social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We love hearing from you. Many of you have given us some ideas, some questions of what you would like us to cover on the pod. We love hearing them, and I promise you, we are considering each and every one. And we love it when you follow us and give us a comment wherever you're listening to your podcast, whether it be Apple, Spotify, or any other platform. My co-producers on this podcast are Jess Carroll and Carrie Hayden from 6-1 Digital. Thanks so much to Riverside for the music. And thank you once again for listening to the podcast. We have so much lined up for 2026. It is a very exciting year. Wherever you are in your day, as I end every single episode, please take care. Oh, I am thrilled about this week's movie recommendation. It is from beloved Canadian filmmaker Sarah Polley. She made a movie called Away From Her back in 2006, 20 years ago. Sarah went on to win an Academy Award for Women Talking, but she was actually nominated the first time for Away From Her for screenplay. And her lead actress, Julie Christie, was also nominated. And the film also stars our beloved Gordon Pinsent. Watch it. It's a really tender story about dementia and a couple who is still doing their best to love each other through the diagnosis.